You're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek, where we discuss the hidden layers and deeper meanings found in all the Star Trek TV series, movies, and more. And today we're discussing the original series episode, Tomorrow is Yesterday. I'm Dom Bettinelli, and joining me today on the panel are Jimmy Akin. Hey, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
And Father Cory Sticha. Hey, Father Cory.
How's it going?
Folks, remember to like The Secrets of Star Trek wherever you find us, like on Facebook at facebook.com/StarQuestMedia. Retweet us where we are on Twitter at SQPN, and leave us comments where you find us. We love to hear from you. I want to tell you, I want to tell you about, I got my notes all messed up. I want to tell you about another show on the StarQuest Network you are sure to enjoy called The Secrets of Star Wars. You can find that wherever fine podcasts are found or at sqpn.com/Star Wars. See, I'm on autopilot sometimes, and then I look at my script, and I'm like, where's my note? So, anyway. But today we're talking about this original series' first season episode, Tomorrow is Yesterday. And Jimmy, can you give us a recap of what happens?
I can. This week, the Enterprise has been thrown back in time to the 1960s by an encounter with a black hole. And the Air Force dispatches a pilot to intercept them as a UFO. But the tractor beam crushes his airplane, and they're forced to bring him on board. Initially, they plan not to return him since he's seen what the future is like, but Spock learns that he will have a son who is pivotal to a future space mission, so they have to send him back. To do this, they need to make it so no one will believe his story, so they steal the audio and video recordings of the UFO encounter. In the process, they also accidentally beam up an Air Force sergeant. Spock and Scotty develop a plan to throw themselves back to the future by slingshotting around the sun. As they do so, they go backwards in time, and they then they start moving forwards in time again, and they beam the pilot and the sergeant back to where they came from at the appropriate times before successfully returning the Enterprise to its own century. The end.
So, first impressions, Father Cory?
Well, I kind of enjoyed this. I mean, it's funny where in Star Trek, time travel has become a trope, but this was the first one. This was when they first started time travel. This is where we first got the slingshot maneuver around the sun, which we later see in, the search for whales and things like that. So this is kind of where they set the pattern that they would follow later with other stories like this. And I kind of enjoyed it. Of course, I got a kick out of the 1960s stock Air Force footage and the Air Force uniforms, kind of. They were close, but not quite, stuff like that. But it was it was an enjoyable story. It really was. It was actually pretty decent for the first time travel story of Star Trek.
How about you, Jimmy? Overall?
Yeah, I enjoyed it. It's written by D.C. Fontana, so of course it's going to be good. Based on a story idea by Gene Kuhn, if I recall correctly, and that's another positive sign. I thought it was very well done. It is based, there are a couple of pieces of lore about this episode that may be of interest. Now, one, you may have heard that when the Enterprise is in orbit around Earth, there was a plan because Bonanza was another NBC show at the time. It was hugely popular. There was a plan to have them monitor a TV broadcast of Bonanza. That's true, but not for this episode. That's true for the third season episode, Assignment Earth, which was Gene Roddenberry's backdoor pilot for a Doctor Who ripoff.
Right.
And it was in that episode they were going to have the Enterprise monitor Bonanza, but it didn't end up happening. Also, so that's kind of a piece of lore that's connected really with a different episode. This episode seems to be based, at least, now I don't have confirmation of this, but to my mind, it seems to be based on an actual UFO encounter that occurred in 1948 with Captain Thomas Mantell, who was a pilot in Kentucky. And when a UFO was reported on radar, they sent him up to take a look at it, and he went up to intercept, and he ended up dying. And his plane crashed, and he perished. And this idea of American Air Force plane goes up to intercept a UFO, and it gets crushed by the alien tractor beam. It seems to me quite reminiscent of the Captain Thomas Mantell UFO incident.
And in fact, there were quite a number of incidents in that time period, the late 40s, early 50s, if I remember correctly, where they were sending fighters up to intercept unidentified flying objects, well, even over D.C., I think, at one point, or Washington, D.C.
Various places, yeah.
Yeah, this is the Project Blue Book era of UFO things. So this would have been very contemporary for Star Trek to do this. So I think it's interesting.
You still see it today. Now they just happen to be Chinese weather balloons.
Yes, right.
Also notice that that they don't have the term black hole yet. It hadn't become established yet. In the captain's log at the beginning of the episode, they refer to having encountered a black star. And that apparently was an early term for black hole, but they don't have it. The term at least has not penetrated the popular imaginations of Hollywood scriptwriters.
Another term that you don't hear again after this episode is
USPA.
Kirk refers to their authority coming from United Earth Space Probe Agency. But after that, it really becomes it's Starfleet and the United Federation of Planets.
Originally, in first season episodes, they haven't worked out the concept of the Federation yet and Starfleet yet. And so they're from the United Earth, and they're authorized by the United Earth Space Probe Agency, which they sometimes abbreviate to USPA.
USPA, ISPA, we all SPA. So
it was kind of interesting that this was very much a bottle episode, where it's all established sets, but it wasn't just Star Trek established sets. It was also the stock Desilu random corridor sets that you'd see like on Mission Impossible.
Right.
Because I know, having watched a bunch of the Mission Impossible, I recognize some of those corridors.
That's good. One thing it does, because the episode was recorded, taped in 1967, but the Enterprise goes back to 1969. Right. In fact, July of 1969, and in fact, a week before the launch of Apollo 11, and they predict it pretty good that Apollo 11 would happen on a Wednesday. They actually do say that next Wednesday they pick up a radio broadcast. Apollo 11 will launch. They said it's 6:30 in the morning, or 6 o'clock in the morning. Apollo 11 launched at 9:30 in the morning. But pretty darn close to predict 2.5 years in advance.
And they didn't explicitly say it was 1969.
Well, okay, that's true. Because
they just say, but we just know that it was the week before.
The week before, right. So
the week before the first manned moonshot.
Yep. That's right. So that's how we kind of, in retrospect, establish it. But when it aired, it would have been just sometime whenever they get around to launching Apollo 11.
Yeah,
That's true.
One of the things that happens early that's kind of interesting is when so the pilot that's following them is Captain Christopher, John Christopher. He's also listed as Major Christopher in some sources. But Captain Christopher is intercepting them, and he's coming up from below, and Spock says, that plane may be packing nukes.
Yeah.
And we could, if it fires at us with one of them, it could severely damage us and possibly prevent us from getting home. And so that's why they turn on the tractor beam. That's the motivating reason. And then the tractor beam crushes the ship and the plane, and they've got to beam Captain Christopher out, which is the excuse to get him on board. Now, all that's paint by numbers writing, but while we did have nukes on planes in the Cold War, I don't think we had them on fighters like this. No, I mean, they were... we had them on bombers.
The F-104 was capable of carrying a tactical nuke missile. They did have missile.
I don't think the U.S. ever developed the tactical missile. Now maybe it could have done it as a bomber. I don't know. I don't know the F-104. I am familiar with it as one of the historical jets of the Air Force, but I don't think we ever developed like the Sidewinder version of a nuke.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure we didn't have them on planes that were based. I mean, they say that the Enterprise appeared over Omaha, Nebraska.
Yeah.
Right.
And I don't think we had nukes on planes flying over the U.S., fighter planes flying over the U.S. on a regular basis. We had them on bombers that we'd keep up at the dew line, past the dew line for monitoring the Soviets, and then they could go over the pole and drop the nukes in Russia. But Mr. Spock may have been misinformed due to errors created in the record system in the Third World War.
A quick Google says the F-104 was capable of carrying 4 different nuclear bombs, the B-28, E-43, B-57, and B-61. And I gotta excuse it only because it's capable of carrying. The records would have showed it's capable, but they don't know they're over Nebraska or it's he's just saying it's capable of carrying.
Well, they do eventually figure out where they're at, but and we should mention at this time, in the late 60s, the B-52 was a brand new bomber, and that absolutely did carry nukes, especially out of places like Minot, North Dakota.
Yeah, there's actually quite a number of fighters that were capable of carrying nuclear bombs.
But as far as like an air-to-air capable nuke, I don't think we've ever developed that.
Which is, we're kind of getting into the weeds, but yeah.
This is also the era that gave us the SR-71 Blackbird, which was itself responsible for a lot of UFO sightings. It was developed at Groom Lake out at Area 51 as part of a kind of joint project with the CIA. They had 2 versions of the plane. The CIA version was known as the Ox Cart, and the Air Force version of the plane was known as the RS-71 for reconnaissance and strike, because you want to do your reconnaissance before you do the strike. But then Lyndon Johnson, who was president at the time, was giving a speech where he was announcing the Air Force version. The Ox Cart was still secret, but he was announcing the Air Force version. And he accidentally inverted the letters and said SR-71 instead of RS-71. And when your commander-in-chief does that,
guess what?
Its new name is SR-71.
Go get the enlisted guys out there with the stencils and start fixing all the planes.
Still one of the greatest jets ever produced. The SR-71, still one of my favorites.
And someone could quip that Lyndon Johnson was kind of a strike first and reconnaissance later guy.
Yes. Strike first, ask questions later. So this is the first time we see Earth in this series of the original series, which is in another interesting first for this episode. Also, as the first time travel episode, Kirk, when they beam Captain Christopher aboard, Kirk goes to meet him in the transporter room. He's remarkably blasé about this guy from the past. And hey, have a look around, see what there is to see. See how amazing the future is going to be.
And that, I guess, is suggestive of they haven't, it's true for off-screen reasons as well, but on-screen, they're not used to time travel yet. They haven't developed protocols for how to handle it.
Right.
Well, and he does do kind of we'll explain more later, as they're standing in the transporter room and Captain Christopher is asking all these questions, and we'll explain more later. But hey, let's give you a tour of the most secret, important part of the ship by going up to the bridge and having Uhura give you a tour, a guided tour. Should mention, by the way, Jimmy, you mentioned where he was mentioned as Major Christopher. That's because the closing credits have him as Major Christopher, although his insignia is Captain. He has the 2 bars of Captain on his shoulder.
Yep.
Yeah.
As he and Kirk are heading to the bridge, this is a very 1960s moment. They pass a female crewman in the corridor, and he does a double take, and then we get the jazzy hubba hubba trumpets play. Wah, 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 that sort of thing.
I didn't notice the trumpets, but okay.
That typical 60s, like, wow, what a funny moment to see a woman aboard, sort of thing. That was
and he is impressed when Kirk says that she's a crewman. And we're a combined he starts to ask about your branch of the service,
right?
And Kirk explains we're a combined service, not in the sense of being co-ed, which they are, but they have elements of Air Force, Space Force, Marines, all of that goes into Starfleet.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly.
So we do get that moment where Spock has to explain the time paradox to Kirk. That
we've in that same scene, Kirk
when
also
he
says this is one of 12 ships like it in the fleet, which is significant, a bit of Star Trek, Starfleet lore. And then, of course, when he meets Spock on the bridge, he's in the process. Captain Christopher is in the process of saying, "I've never believed in little green men," and Mr. Spock says, "Neither have I." and the problem is Spock doesn't look alien enough to really sell that line.
Yeah.
I mean, he looks distinctive, but he also looks pretty darn human. And part of me is also like, but Mr. Spock, Journey to Babel, those aliens and Bolians, and wait, what do you mean you don't believe in little green men?
So I'm making a joke, which is interesting for Spock. That is a nice little moment there. I gather that Spock, the makeup for Leonard Nimoy, was supposed to be more distinctively green, but when they filmed it, it just didn't come across as... Like, he's supposed to have more of a green tint to his skin.
Originally, it was meant to be red, but they changed that.
Yeah.
And he just looks like, okay, Chinese guy with elf ears and arch eyebrows.
Yeah.
I didn't even notice that he was meant... I mean, of course, I was watching poor color televisions in the early 1970s, and I didn't even realize it was... I first encountered the fact, his skin tone is different than... Captain Kirk's, and I didn't notice that originally when I was a kid.
And it really doesn't even today show up as that much different.
Yeah. They really could have done it different.
And that's one thing I kind of joked about the Air Force uniforms. You look at the blues uniform, the dress uniform, and that was a very different blue than even the historical Air Force uniforms were. And I know that was making up for the discrepancies in color from primitive technology. The color television technology. Yeah. They had to do different, that's why there's the strange colors in the Enterprise and everything like that, is they wanted to show up a certain way on the old TVs that we can't really appreciate today with our, millions of colors, high definition, 4K televisions.
Oh, kids, you don't know how good you have it.
Yeah.
But, for example, just touching back on the skin tone issue, it was always obvious to me that George Takei as Sulu was Asian. He's got just an Asian skin tone, but Spock's makeup was not that significant. He didn't look that. When I look close at a version of it today, it's like, okay, that's not meant to be a human skin tone, but it's still so close to Caucasian that it's hard to tell unless it's been pointed out.
Right.
And that's actually one thing on Enterprise with Paul. They did try to make her skin tone different, and you could kind of tell it was different.
Oh, really? Oh, I didn't notice that. I just thought she's got a suntan.
Yeah. No, it's there was. I mean, it's a darker skin tone, but it is. I didn't kind of notice it's meant to look a little bit different.
They eventually make many of the Vulcans look, Semitic or Arabic, from that. And whereas like the TOS Klingons were always swarthy, the Mediterranean look to them, and so. But they only
just black guys.
Yeah, or
for the ones they didn't want to spend makeup money on.
That's true. So I mentioned the time paradox and Spock's explanation, and the fact that Christopher can't go back. He initially says, "Well, he's unimportant to history," which is like, ouch.
I know. I love the way Spock gets handled in this episode, because at first he's like, "We can't send this captain. We cannot send this guy back. He knows too much. He could manipulate, if he was unscrupulous, he could manipulate industries and even nations and thwart our future from coming about. And even if he doesn't, he could let the info slip to someone who would do that. So we can't send him back, and he's not consequential to history." I checked. And then when they're explaining this to Captain Christopher in Kirk's quarters, he's objecting and saying, "But I have a wife and 2 children. What about them?" And at that moment, Spock looks profoundly uncomfortable. And he realizes he has not checked on the children. And they don't drag it out. The very next scene, Spock is back and says, "Captain, I made a miscalculation. I failed to check on his children. And guess what? One of them is pivotal to history."
Yeah.
And isn't born yet.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was good. I like that. Yeah, it was weird that he didn't look at the descendants. An interesting omission on Spock's part. Speaking of that meeting in the captain's quarters,
I just love that look of him being on. The camera cuts to him.
Yeah.
And Leonard Nimoy is just looking really uncomfortable at that moment.
Yeah. That's actually nice, subtle writing and direction there.
Yes.
They don't come right out and say
There's
it.
a lot of that in this episode.
Yeah.
There really is.
Yep. They had this odd subplot about the computer core being the personality being like made flirty.
With Rachel Barrett as the first time as the computer voice.
Yeah. Oh, that's right.
Captain Kirk says that Spock says that and Captain Kirk together kind of say they went to a planet called Signet 4 for a computer overhaul. It's a female-dominated society. They thought our computer didn't have a personality, so they gave it one. And it's a flirty female personality that's constantly trying to flirt with Kirk.
I want that flirty female personality put in my Alexa. That would be fun.
I like the way I like that where at the end of it he says, record that we need to take this in for overhaul or replacement. Computed.
Yeah, very, very pouty.
No, but tearful, like computed.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do not want a flirty Alexa. It says too much unnecessary stuff to me already. I'm always trying to find commands to shut down unnecessary things that it says.
No kidding. Yes.
I thought that was kind of a fun subplot of,
Yeah. It was interesting. There was enough time to add that in, and it didn't detract from anything.
And it wasn't offensive, or it didn't drag out the plot line by any stretch of the imagination.
And they let the computer kind of get the last word, because at the very end of the episode, even though he's threatened to have it dismantled if it keeps calling him dear, when they finally get back to their own century and they're talking to Starfleet, the computer breaks in and says, "Record ship arrival, dear." And it's like the next to last thing in the episode.
That's right. That is right. So, speaking of Captain Christopher's son, eventual son being pivotal, if his son was to be born sometime within the next 10 years after the episode, so between 69 and 79, logically he'd be in his 50s about now, maybe 40s, which means that the Saturn mission that he was supposed to lead
he would be in his 40s now.
If he was born in 69, he'd be in his 50s. I know that because I was born in 68. So he would be about my age. If he was born within the next 10 years, then he'd be in his 40s. And so that mission to Saturn would, within the Star Trek timeline, would be sometime around
2010.
2010 or so, or maybe now if he was 40. So
now, when was when we did the Picard season 2? When was that set?
Oh, that was 2020.
Was that 50s?
No, that was 24.
Oh, that's right. It was just a couple of years from, yeah.
So was that Captain Christopher's son in charge of that mission?
Well, that was a Jupiter mission.
That was Jupiter. Okay. So
because it was the Rene Picard was the one in charge of the Jupiter mission.
They should have made it where she and Christopher's son were on that. Like, they just should have thrown that in there.
I was trying to remember if there was any mention of Christopher.
Sean Jeffrey Christopher.
Yeah, I was trying to remember if there was any mention during that season. I don't think there was. It would have been cool, kind of look back and go, oh, wait.
That would have been Terry Matalas would have done it.
Oh, yeah. We would have seen him on screen.
Terry Matalas would have done a completely different season 2 of Picard.
He would have. So this fun couple of scenes where Kirk and Sulu wandering around the Air Force Base in Omaha looking for evidence. That was kind of fun.
They've got a sonic screwdriver.
Yes, they do.
They come to a locked door, and Sulu hands Kirk a device, and it goes woo, and the door opens.
Yeah. We should mention, again, for those of us, Air Force geeks, there is a base in Omaha. It's called Offutt. It's the headquarters of SAC, Strategic Air Command, and was at this time as well. But this was an unnamed base that they were at.
But
and it
would
was
be
the Air
logical.
Defense Command.
Yeah, would it be logical that stuff would show up? They'd be sent to Offutt Air Force Base for that purpose. They end up having to escape as the air police show up, and Kirk gets into a nice Donnybrook with the three of them. That was fun.
Yeah, he comes out. So Sulu is in the back room with all the film they're stealing, and they're about to beam up, but Kirk comes out to check. And when he realizes the the MPs are here.
Mhm.
He pulls the door shut behind him and then attacks. And he just launches into these guys. No conversation, no explanations. It's just, we've got to get our 5 minutes of action into this episode. So Kirk just attacks.
Classic Kirk.
In order to give Sulu time to beam out.
Including the full body, where he throws his whole body at him.
I love that. That was awesome. You don't see that anymore. And the whole reason he couldn't beam out, but that Sulu could, was because his communicator, he'd already lost his communicator when the previous
sergeant beamed up.
Got beamed out, which was a funny little moment.
Which is a nice bit of writing. Notice how they set up why he can't just beam out.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes it harder for them to find him because he doesn't have a communicator, so they can't say, where's my captain's iPhone, and locate him.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So that's nicely set up. It's nicely plotted. You have these different things folding into consequences down the line in this episode. And we also have a nice line. Now, at this point, as we've mentioned on the show before, they hadn't determined what century the Star Trek is occurring in, so you have inconsistencies. Right. It was eventually established it's 300 years ahead of us.
Right.
But like in the Squire of Gothos episode, Trelane implies it's like 800 years and in our future. And in this episode, we have a line where the Lieutenant Colonel Fellini is interrogating Kirk, and Kirk is being flippant in his replies. And Fellini says, I'm going to lock you up for 200 years. And Kirk says, that sounds about right. But eventually it would be 300.
That was a good line. I like that.
Yeah.
Also, as the one of the things you often have in these time travel episodes is somebody playing around with a phaser, and the person from the future getting a little uncomfortable with it. I mean, we had that in Picard season 2. We've had that in DS9 with the time travel there. So yeah, and he's like, be careful with that. You might take out half the base. With that. So the Christopher is an interesting figure because, you know, he still has his duty, and at one point he does try to escape from the ship. Doesn't go well for him, of course. But there is that. For one thing, they're letting him wander around on his own. But bad idea. But he wants to get back to his family, and he doesn't want, you know, to.
Well, especially once he finds out that he's got a son.
Yes.
Coming eventually.
I want to know what his plan is when he tries to escape, because they've given him quarters on the Enterprise, which we never see.
Yeah.
But Kirk phones him in his quarters and he's not there. And so he gets on the intercom and says, Captain Christopher is not in his quarters. Put someone outside the transporter room. It's like, okay, dude, what was your plan? You know, I mean, you're going to go to the transporter room, and you get into the transporter room, and then what happens in your ideal scenario? You know,
Well,
how you don't know how to work this piece of technology.
Wasn't Kyle in there, Transporter Chief Kyle?
Yeah, because he says to him, I'm going to get on this thing, and you're going to, you know, make it do its, you know, you're going to send me down. You're going to beam me down.
Yeah, but I mean,
that's his plan. His plan was, if you don't do it, I shoot you, and then, oh, well.
there's so much that's wrong with that plan, especially if in light of what is later established that the transporter can do.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I'm going to beam you now, and you're in a security cell.
Yeah, they say you're in the brig.
By the way, notice they've got food dispensers in the transporter room. Now, originally they were going to take him to the mess hall for this, but they didn't have the time and money, and so they just put the food dispensers in the transporter room. But think about that. This is where people come on the ship and leave the ship, and you put food dispensers right there. And you got a guy stationed there all day with nothing to do but wait for people to show up. This is not the most dietetically sound plan.
Well, I figured, you get up, you beam up to the ship, you haven't eaten in a while, you can grab a snack before you head up to the bridge.
Take some snacks with you on your away mission.
Yeah.
Well,
set up a banquet right there for dignitaries.
If you want to retcon it, you could make them replicators. They weren't replicators at the time; they were food dispensers. Right. But if they were replicators, that's where you get your equipment for your whatever mission, but
that we never see them using because we never see them again. But
exactly. The other thing is interesting is so far we've seen food was cubes, that whole futuristic food thing. But here we get a nice bowl of soup, bowl of chicken soup that the sergeant gets to marvel at. So Spock comes up with a new plan. We need to slingshot, around the sun, we're going to go back in time and then slingshot forward in time. And
so, okay. Now, prescinding from the fact that you can't use the slingshot effect to go back in time, Spock apparently is unfamiliar with Einsteinian physics because there's a very simple solution to how to get back to your own time. You fly sublight, but close to light. You go way out, and then you come way back, and it's your own time. No fuss, no muss. Time dilation will slow down time on the ship, and you won't experience, depending on how arbitrarily close you get to the speed of light, you won't experience any significant time delay, and you'll be right back in your own time. You don't need to use slingshot effects or black stars or any tech other than what you've already got, just relativistic speeds, and you're back in your own century.
That could have worked.
The whole premise of the episode, though, is the slingshot effect caused them to go back in time, so they had to stick with that.
And this is the whole thing that we see, like you mentioned, in the Search for Whales, A Voyage Home, and it just like in that one, we have a moment where Spock is standing there and McCoy, it's like, what are you doing? And Spock's like, I'm doing my calculations right now in my head, the time calculations. So I thought that was a nice.
I love the way McCoy puts it in this too. Is like, shouldn't you be working on this? I am, Doctor.
Yes, exactly.
And McCoy just looks at him like, never mind.
And then they're going to, because they're going to be able to go back in time a bit, they're going to be able to drop off Captain Christopher and the sergeant.
Guard.
Yeah. Which. They're glossing over a lot here.
Yeah. What they show us on screen is they go back, so they're traveling forward through time again, and they get up to the point where they originally were intercepted by Captain Christopher. So you got Captain Christopher is sitting in his plane, and then the transporter effect appears on him. Yep. And it's like, are they beaming him into his own body? What is going on here?
Yeah, they basically quantum leap him. That's what they do.
Yeah, and he looks around startled once the transporter effect stops. Captain Christopher is like in his cockpit. He's looking around like, what is going on? And that would suggest he's got a memory of where he just was. And he's surprised to be back in his plane now, even though that's what the plan was. But he then, when in talking to the people on the radio, seems not to remember what he experienced, and that could be. And so I don't know what to make of this. We see something similar that's equally vague when they get a little further along to where they transported up the guard, and he's not in the same location as he was. He's out in the hallway as opposed to in a room with Kirk and Sulu.
Right.
But he's in a hallway, and he stops, and the transporter effect appears over him. And then he comes over to a door and looks through it suspiciously, like he does remember or doesn't. And it's just confusing. I'm not sure what we're supposed to make of this.
They had a line about how if they do this right, that it will happen at the moment that they were originally beamed up, or just before the moment they were beamed up, excuse me, and that there wouldn't be anything there for them to remember because they'll have changed it so that the Enterprise wasn't actually there when the fighter plane got to that point, and so Christopher wouldn't remember any of it, and that the guard wouldn't remember it because Sulu and Kirk weren't in the room that the guard was looking into. And that's how they explained it on episode, nonsense. But that doesn't make sense because if they beamed Christopher to just before he encountered the Enterprise would still be there from the first time they went through that time.
Right.
And then the same thing with the guard. The guard would still look in the, so they kind of, that was kind of a hand wavium of, well, because we've changed or we've gone back in time and then forward, we've changed time. So this didn't actually happen.
Yeah, it's poor. This aspect, it's a fun episode, but this aspect of it is poor time travel writing. This is not how time travel would work.
And they had no expectation that their memories would be erased either. I mean, that they could have just been beaming them back with their full memories. No evidence of the events, so that might have been certainly enough.
Yeah, that was enough.
I mean, if you could change the time for Captain Christopher, where he doesn't actually encounter the Enterprise, then yeah, that means the whole thing with the stealing the tapes off of the computer and the
fact,
photo would never happen either.
That wouldn't have happened either. You could have just beamed him back, and the whole thing would have been averted. But the rigmarole of we've got to get all that evidence. Okay,
none of that was necessary.
None of that would have been necessary, and you just beamed him, assuming you didn't kill him by beaming him into himself. Because that would be really bad.
Yeah,
you did. But assuming you didn't kill him by beaming him into himself, you just beamed in somebody who has memories that experienced all of this.
Yeah.
Just like you did. When you get back to the 23rd century, you're going to remember all this. It didn't affect your memories. It's not going to affect his.
Yeah, and you made a good point too. But with the slingshot, none of that stuff that happened on the airbase was at all necessary. Like they didn't have to gather up that evidence because they were, undoing things or whatever.
They were rewriting time, but before they rewrote it, they plopped a guy who had memories of the original timeline down in the middle of it.
Exactly. One thing that continues to bother me too is they get like the speeds involved here. We're going warp factor 9. You have time to get into your space suit, into your flight suit, and wander down to the transporter. We'll get you there eventually. Like, no, it should be instantaneous. But it's
they said something like you got 15 minutes or something like that to get ready, or
But like if it takes 15 minutes to get from Earth to the sun at warp factor 9, like Vulcan is going to be literally the planet between Mercury and the sun.
Yeah,
there's been the mythology was all about. Yeah,
I do like one of the things they do that kind of resonates with the ufology of the time, which is when at one point when they're talking about stealing the evidence, Captain Christopher says, "So you're going to make me out to be a liar?" And Spock says, "No, just one of the thousands of people who thought they saw a UFO." And he says it like it's a perfectly reasonable thing. And I like that nod to the audience that it's okay to think you've seen a UFO. It doesn't mean you're crazy or weird or anything like that. You just saw something and you're not sure what it was.
Well, and it's in fact has come out in the last couple of years that hundreds of military pilots, Air Force and Navy and Marine, have seen unidentified aerial phenomena in the skies that cannot be explained by conventional means. And so, that's a thing that happens.
Oh, I also wanted to mention we have a nice creative use of the transporter here, because when they beam down to get Kirk, Christopher insists on coming with. And they break into Fellini's office and they stun everybody. And Spock goes back into Fellini's office. And it's at this moment that Christopher makes another escape attempt. It's like, you don't got to bring me back. I'm back now. I'm staying. You guys split. And then Spock appears in the corridor outside of the front office and walks up behind Christopher and nerve pinches him. And so what obviously happened, he went into Fellini's office. He suspected what was going to happen. He had them beam him out into the hallway and he just came back in. And it's like, okay, that's a nice, clever, tactical use of the transporter.
Right. Without being obvious about it, without like making a big deal. He just did it.
Yeah.
Admittedly, I didn't think quite that deep. I just figured there was another door into the office from the hallway. I mean, it sounds better, but I just like...
That's possible too.
On the other hand, Spock is talking about we need to get out of the sun's magnetic radiation. It's like, okay, that's not what drives the slingshot effect. It's not magnetic.
No.
The actor who plays Captain Christopher, Roger Perry, apparently liked his Starfleet uniform so much he wanted to take it home. And DeForest Kelley told him they frown on that. But if you just slide it into your bag, nobody's going to say anything. And he decided not to do it after all. And then years later, when Star Trek was Star Trek,
Yeah.
he regretted. That was a nice little.
Well, and they
story.
gave him a uniform that was the captain band too. Or the 03 band would have been lieutenant.
Lieutenant, yeah, the Air Force lieutenant equivalent.
Well, Air Force captain.
Sorry, Air Force captain.
Navy lieutenant is Air Force captain. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah,
so
that was a nice touch.
They gave him the proper rank insignia on the uniform even.
That was a nice touch.
There's also a little bit of error in, I guess, depending on what you mean, where, as they're flying forward through time, they get to, or about to, actually, maybe they're about to go back in time, but they've got Christopher on the bridge, and he's still in his Starfleet uniform. And and Kirk refers to them having a quartermaster on the ship. That's how he got the uniform. He tells Mr. Spock, have the quartermaster issue him something better than the flight suit he was wearing when we beamed him up. But he's there on the bridge at the end, and he's reflecting on the fact that they're in space. And Kirk says, you made it here ahead. He said, I tried out for the program, and I didn't have what they wanted. So I didn't get to be part of the space program. And Kirk says, well, you made it here ahead of all of them, except the Mercury program and the Gemini program and the previous Apollo tests and all of the Soviet programs. Yeah, you made it here ahead of all of them. Well,
I will say that at least with the remastered edition, I don't know what the original footage was like, but in the remastered edition, right before he says that line, you see the moon come onto the view screen.
You don't in the original.
Okay.
Yeah, I watched the original.
So they corrected that on the remastered, where he's gone past the moon.
So he did get out there. Yep, ahead of everyone.
Okay,
yep,
that's
far.
good. That's good.
Excellent. Final thoughts, Father Cory?
Nothing here. I like I said, I enjoyed it. This was a fun episode. Again, there's a little bit of humor and camp in there, and it was very enjoyable.
How about you, Jimmy?
I don't guess I have anything else to mention. It was a fun episode. I enjoyed it.
Yep. I mean, as one of the two episodes that go back to the 60s, I enjoyed both of them a lot, and I really like this one.
The other is so much more casual. It's like, we're in the 60s now for a mission of historical research. It's like, really? They approved that?
I guess the Department of Temporal Affairs is like,
yeah.
But there's a reason why they dislike Kirk so much, right?
Yeah, the man is a menace.
All right. So we'd like to take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create the Secrets of Star Trek, including Father Stephen W., Carrie O., Christy R., James M., and Charles S. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue the Secrets of Star Trek and all the shows at StarQuest. And you can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. And we'd also like to thank Victor Lambs, who edited this episode. So that's it from us. What did you think of this original series episode, Tomorrow is Yesterday? You can let us know by commenting on the show at sqpn.com/trek, our Facebook page at facebook.com/StarQuestMedia, send an email to trek@sqpn.com, or visit our Discord community at sqpn.com/Discord. You can also watch The Secrets of Star Trek on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/StarQuestMedia, where you should comment, like, and subscribe, and make sure to hit the bell to get notifications. We'll be back next time when we'll be discussing the animated series episode, Once Upon a Planet. Until then, Father Cory Sticha, thank you for joining me and sharing The Secrets of Star Trek.
Thank you, Dom.
Jimmy Akin, thank you as well.
Thank you, and live long and prosper.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to The Secrets of Star Trek on StarQuest. And remember, the truth is, I'm a little green man from Alpha Centauri. Beautiful place. You ought to see it.